I'm 6 years old and my lungs are burning. I can taste blood. I look down and I watch my green Gola trainers pounding on the tarmac. And I look up and I watch the race leaders disappear around the bend. 1 lap to go. And I run harder still. So hard and so fast that I forget to breathe. And now I feel sick. My bottom lip starts to go. I start to falter and I'm looking along the barrier and there he is. My dad. He steps over and he scoops me up in his arms. And I'm a mess of sweat and hair and a little bit of vomit. And I am crying my little eyes out. I'm crying because I have gone as hard and as fast as I think I could. But I haven't made the finish line. And I'm crying because I think I've failed. Both my parents are Olympic rowers. They went to Moscow in 1980. And I grew up in a household where there is an Olympic bronze medal just on the living room wall. I thought that was normal. I thought perhaps that was something you just went and bought down at home base. I was raised in an environment where I was led to believe that I could honestly do anything I wanted to if I just worked hard enough for it. And thanks to my parents, I got a pretty good deal when it came to the gene pool. And as the years went by, I worked that gene pool to within an inch of its life. I did weightlifting, cycling, acrobatics, rugby, football, judo, trampolining, anything and everything under the sun when it came to sport. By age 21, I'd followed in my parents' footsteps, and I was an elite athlete rowing for Great Britain, with a dream of becoming an Olympian myself one day too. But in pursuit of being physically the best that I could be, I kind of lost sight of who I was as a whole. And after a few years at that elite level, what I was doing day in, day out, the sacrifices that I was having to make, they just weren't making me happy anymore. And this time it was my mum that scooped me up in her arms. And she held me as I looked at my dream of being an Olympian just like them, square in the eyes, and I let it go. What followed was that I thought I should go and get a normal job. That's what you do, age 24, go and get a normal job. And so I spent my days in a big corporation looking at PowerPoint boxes and Excel documents and discussing perhaps whether the next marketing campaign needed a bit more zhuzh. I sat there at my desk one day and I just thought, is this it? Is this me from now until the end of time? Is this everything I have to give the world? And the answer was no. And so if the answer is no, then the chances are I probably wasn't getting the most back in return. And I didn't see it now, but I didn't see it then, but I do see it now, that what had happened is I'd placed my life, myself, in a set of limits that were completely defined by someone else. I mean, I was progressing in a steady, measured pace, and it's a lot easier to live your life that way, to be told when you can and can't move on, what you are and aren't capable of. But the problem is you end up this 50% version of yourself. There is a wonderful quote by a spiritualist called Debbie Ford, and she says that we are born as a castle of 1,000 rooms. And as time goes by, we get jaded, we get worn down, and we board up parts of ourselves. And we end up, in adulthood, as a one-bed flat in Englefield Green. Nothing wrong with Englefield Green. I love Englefield Green. This is what happened to me. I wasn't even a one-bed flat. I was pretty much a broom cupboard. And so I shut my eyes, Excel document in the background, and I asked that golden question. What would I do if I could do anything tomorrow? And before I tell you the answer to that, it was a good answer. I'm going to talk to you about the Disney creation process. Disney are some of the creators of the greatest films ever made. Every single one incredibly unique, but they're all made using the same creative process. And it happens in 3 stages. First, we're going to start here with the dreamer. This guy's job is just to dream, to come up with the most far-fetched, ridiculous ideas, throw them out in the hundreds and the thousands. Most importantly, the dreamer's ideas are not allowed to be judged, and the dreamer must not judge their own ideas. Their job, simply to dream. The dreamer then passes their big mess of crazy ideas down the line to the realist. And the realist's job is to translate. It's to put the dreamer's ideas into some kind of tangible form. So in the case of Disney, this would be to put it into a computer animation program, or perhaps to draw it down on paper. Once the realist has put it into a form that can eventually be judged, they then pass it down the line to this guy. This is the critic. And the critic does what he does best. He rips it apart, he picks holes, he takes the pieces he likes and the bits he doesn't, and he throws them away. Oh, Mickey, your ears are far too big. Minnie, polka dot, so 2013. Once the critic has had his wicked way, he throws it back down the line to the dreamer, and off we go again. The point of this being is that Disney films would have not even a tenth of the magic that we know them to have if that dreamer wasn't involved in the process, if we started with the realist or the critic first. And I think that all too often in our everyday lives, our critic is sat right on top of our dreamer's head. And so every idea that's born out of creativity and passion and individuality, it gets stopped short before it even gets a chance to air. I've got responsibilities, I can't afford that. What about the children? How can you be so selfish? Think about the children. All of these things should be considered, but at a later date, they shouldn't be a reason for stopping us going in the first place. So I asked myself that question, what would I do if I could do anything tomorrow? And my answer was to take off on a bike and to ride it around the world. Absolutely ridiculous. No particular rhyme or reason, other than that I discovered I had a passion for adventure, travel, and endurance sport. And when the time was right, I passed that idea down the line to the realist and to the critic, and I scaled it back a bit. And I decided that maybe I'd just go and cycle 11,000 miles through every state of America. From Alaska to Hawaii, the long way round. Oh, and it was the most amazing journey. It catapulted my life in a completely new direction. I learned so much about a country that I think we all know, America. It's incredibly diverse in terms of wildlife, geology, culture, attitudes. But the best thing about it was the people. I want to share with you the most inspirational person that I met on that journey. This is Betty the Hutch Hutchinson. She enters every single year in the Manchester, New Hampshire 5K race to try and break the record for the 90 to 99 years old age group. She's 93 years old. And as I passed through, I got a chance to stay with Betty. And every year she runs this race surrounded by her 19 grandchildren. And these grandchildren, they run and they'll pass 50-year-old men and they'll go with their granny, "Dude, you just got beaten by my grandma!" And off they go. Now, there's a mile between Betty's little house in the woods and her mailbox at the end of her driveway. And every single morning, without fail, she uses that mile for a training run. And I got the chance to go on a training run with Betty. It starts at 6 o'clock in the morning. The ritual begins. Betty negotiates her way down the stairs. She moves to a wooden pew set out by the front door where there's 2 essential items of clothing. She picks up a bright yellow scarf, wraps it round once, twice. She shuffles sideways, picks up a matching yellow beanie, pulls it down over her brow, and I see Hutch emblazoned across the front. She then shuffles over to the kitchen, picks up a boiled egg, starts cramming it in, thinking Betty's on the protein, this is serious stuff. And now we're ready. So we leave out the front door and it's a lovely day, the birds are singing, the sun's shining, and so I start chatting away, but there is no chatting. No chatting allowed on Betty's training run. So we start in silence. And this driveway, as it goes for a mile, it undulates slightly and it winds around a few bends. And we get to the first corner and Betty breaks the silence and she looks sideways at me and she says, "I like to cut the corners." She cuts across my path. Oh, gosh, fine, right, I know that. Thanks, Betty. And then finally, we get within sight of the mailbox and we just crest over the hill and we can see it glinting in the sunlight. And Betty again breaks the silence. She turns sideways, flicks her 2 walking poles backwards, leans forwards and says, "I speed up on the flats." Now, spending time with Betty was such an eye-opener because here is a woman who at 93 years age, I'm sure she has had to deal with doctors, with her family saying, "Take it easy, Betty. You're too old. You don't need to do this. Make it to the finish line gently and with grace. And she hasn't listened. I'm sure she's got a little voice inside her head that tells her exactly the same thing day in, day out. But at 93 years old, she is still in search of her limits. And I think if I'm half the woman that Betty is at 93, I'll be a very, very happy girl. So, I'd finished my American bike ride, and I went back into my day job. And I went back into that 50% version of myself because it was easy, and I didn't really know what else to do. But the problem with glimpsing your true passion, that thing that makes your heart sing, is that once you've seen it, it can't be unseen. It's like a can of worms on steroids. There is no putting the lid back on, and there shouldn't be. So I started to think about other journeys. And I thought about running journeys. And every time I thought about a running journey, I thought, nah, that's not for me. I get injured if I run more than 3 times a week. I mean, I like to run, I really enjoy it, but I'm not really a runner. So I thought I'll leave the running journeys to other people. And then I read this book called Born to Run. And in this book, it talks about the Tarahumara Indian tribe who can run 435 miles in 48 hours. Yeah. And they will routinely run 250 miles. Men, women, children, grandmas, all ages. It's just like popping down the shops for some milk. 250-mile round trip. No problem, apparently. And I looked at them, and I looked at me, and I thought, hang on. There are some differences, but genetically speaking, we're not that far apart. And if this is within them to run those kinds of distances, then surely it's somewhere within here too. And then I read on a bit more, and I found that we, as human beings, all of you included, have the greatest endurance of all mammals on the planet. What a gift. And actually how we used to hunt our prey to death. So the antelope, it would sprint and it would stop, and it would sprint and it would stop, and we'd just keep on running. And then we'd catch it up, we'd smash it on the head and eat it for tea. That is how we caught our prey. And then actually I was honest with myself, and I realised the only reason that I wasn't going to do a running journey was because I wasn't actually thinking that I could make it to the finish line. And what would people think of me if I failed? And I thought that is absolutely the most ridiculous reason not to start anything. So I found a trail in a country that I really, really wanted to explore, New Zealand. It's called the Te Aroa Trail. It goes for 2,000 miles from Bluff at the very tip of the Southern Island, all the way up to Cape Reinga in the north. And I decided that I was going to run this solo and unsupported with all my gear on my back. 72 marathons, carrying my camping gear, my food, water, everything I'd need, completely unsupported. Great idea, isn't it? You should have seen me the night before I left. I was petrified. I had my own critic having a go, saying, you're going to end up stranded up a mountain path, you're going to be alone in the wind and the snow, and there's going to be no shelter. I had an injury on my right foot that I was carrying that I thought might flare up a few days in. And very kindly, other people had actually lent me their critics too. That was nice. And people were saying to me, you can't run with a backpack, you'll give yourself osteoarthritis, you've never run that far before, this isn't possible. And so when I started, I was, needless to say, completely petrified. But I want to tell you a little story about denial. Preparation with the backpack was meticulous. A week before I left, I went out and bought one. Thought that was a great start. And then I measured and weighed out all my gear. And it came to around about 7 kilos. And I thought, whoa, 7 kilos, that's all right. And it looked very neat in its pile. And I thought I can handle 7 kilos, that's okay. And then I put a few more things in. And I put a few more things in. And it actually ended up looking like this. But I didn't weigh it because I didn't want to know. I had an inkling that it was a little bit heavier than 7 kilos, but I thought, we don't need to know that. Unfortunately, halfway through the trip, for some reason, people I met on the trail, they didn't believe me. I'd say, oh, I've got a backpack. Oh, how big's your backpack, Anna? You're running. Yeah, it must be pretty light. Oh, 7 kilos. Really? 7 kilos? I go, yeah, it's not too bad, is it? But I got to one host's house, and they really, really didn't believe me. So while I was having a shower, they took my pack with all my gear in it, and they went and weighed it. And what I thought was actually 7 kilos was in fact 14. And that had meant when I'd been running for up to a week between towns and carrying 7 days worth of food, that I'd been running with 20 kilos on my back. But I didn't think it was beneficial to know. You can't ever prepare for every single challenge that is ahead of you. And if, like me, you have a tendency to freak yourself out a bit, the moral of this story is just tell yourself lies and it'll all be okay. Now, I want to share with you the worst day from my run, because I think that it's in our darkest moments we learn the most about ourselves. Fear was a frequent visitor on my journey. New Zealand, much as it is the developed world, can be a very remote place, especially in the South Island. There's only 4.5 people that live in the whole country, and there's 8.5 million that live in London alone. So the fact is, when I was on the trail in the South Island, if something happened, if I fell over and I couldn't activate my safety tracker, the chances are that no one was going to come by for a couple of days, and that frightened me. They also, the Kiwis, they like to put the trails through rivers. I'm from London. We build bridges to go across rivers. The Kiwis, they just plough it straight through a raging torrent. And this particular day, I had to cross a river 30 times, and I'd started to get into this ritual. I was mostly frightened, but I'd get up to the edge of the river and I'd take my GPS safety tracker off of my backpack and I'd put it in a waterproof bag and I would clip it to my bra and I'd shuffle up, take a deep breath and off I'd go. Sometimes the river was only up to my calf or my knee, but at other points it was right up to my chest. And I'd been going through this day and the going was slow. I had to run 18 miles and I was making really, really slow progress. I was becoming frustrated, tired, and constantly frightened. And then I stepped off a rock, and the undergrowth gave way, and I went over on my ankle with a really loud crack.
I wasn't concentrating, I just stepped off a rock and slipped. Please be okay. I hate this section, it's absolute. Okay, I'm going to try and move.
And I did move. Now, I thought I'd actually broken it at that point, and I thought that was going to be the end of my trip. But as it turns out, I'd only actually sprained it, my right ankle. And I don't know if anyone here has ever sprained an ankle, but for some reason, the sprained ankle then takes it as complete permission just to keep going. I would run along and it'd go, woo, this is what we do now, let's roll. And it took me 4 hours to hobble to the place that was flat enough for me to pitch up my tent. And I crawled in, and I looked at this ballooning ankle, and I thought about my options. And they were to either go 2 days back in one direction to the town I'd just come from and sit it out there, or I could go 4 days onto the bush alone and try and make it to the next town. And I just needed someone to talk this through with. I hated going backwards, but the thought of going forwards, I thought, am I being a complete idiot? I could see the newspaper headlines now. Stupid British girl goes on into the New Zealand bush with a busted ankle. And all I wanted to do was talk to someone, just to have some kind of counsel, have someone say to me, look, it's okay, it's all going to be all right. But I had no phone signal. I had no way of contacting anyone. I hadn't seen anyone in a couple of days. And so I crawled into my tent and I realised that I was at rock bottom. I was frightened, I was injured, I was exhausted. Everything that I'd feared from the outset of the trip had happened. But here's the thing about rock bottom, about that place where all of your fears hang out together. Once you get down there, it's not that bad. I realised that this wasn't my limit. This was just a part of myself I hadn't seen in a really, really long time. This was the girl in the green Gola trainers that had run until her lungs burst. And so I drifted off to sleep, and I woke up stronger the next day. Now, before I left for the trip, I thought I'm going to have some pretty bad days. 72 marathons, something that's going to get pretty bad in there. There's probably going to be a few days where I'm going to want to curl up in a ball and cry and not run. So I packed myself a secret weapon. I packed myself these. That is a unicorn having a fight with a robot under a rainbow. Yeah. I think it is scientifically impossible to be unhappy when you're wearing these pants. They reminded me that I should be grateful. I'm born into a developed world. I have the freedom and the choice to go and explore these places, and nothing really can be that bad for me. These are my pants of perspective. And so the next morning, I woke up and I pulled on my pants of perspective, which matched the ankle strapping that I actually had in my bag. And I decided that I would carry on. I hobbled for 12 miles the next day, and I was able to actually start running again the day after that. And after 5.5 months, carrying a little bit of scar tissue on my right ankle and a backpack that weighed 14 kilos, not 7, I made it 1,911 miles to the top of New Zealand. And I managed to go into schools along the way and speak to 4,000 Kiwi kids in the hope that one day they might go in search of their own limits too. And here's what I've realised. That I would rather live my life on the brink of failure than in the comfort of assured success. When I'm 80 and I smell of wee and gin and tonic, I want to look back on my life and I want to say that was awesome. I had the richest possible experience I could. I think sometimes we get so het up about the fact that we might not be able to finish things that we forget to start. And so I'm looking at all of you and I'm thinking, what is it that you're afraid of starting? And what would happen if you forgot about the finish line and you just started running towards it? Thank you.